Thank you for joining us for today's episode of The Real Spill, a podcast where I spill on all things multifamily advocacy and how we as industry professionals can work with our elected officials, stakeholders, and allies to bring about change for the rental housing industry. My guests are subject matter experts whose unique perspectives will help listeners understand how the issues impact them. Let's get into The Real Spill. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of The Real Spill here on the Multifamily Media Network. And with me today is a first for our podcast. I have three almost perfect strangers. We've never met until we logged on about 10 minutes ago to do our little pre-talk here. And one of my very dear friends, Maria Spencer, who has lined up an amazing panel today. And we're going to be talking about the Choice and Affordable Housing Act. For listeners who are familiar with my content, you know that housing affordability is a hot topic, and as is helping to end our nation's problem and epidemic really with homelessness. And the Choice and Affordable Housing Act is a piece of legislation that aims to streamline the housing choice voucher program throughout the nation. So with that, let's get into the real spill. And I'll turn it over first to Michael to introduce yourself, your organization, and what you do for the housing industry.
Great. Thanks for having me here, Katie. I'm Michael Santos. I am the Associate Director of our U.S. Policy at Results Educational Fund. We're a 501c3, 501c4 grassroots lobbying organization. We're based here in Washington, D.C., and our main vision/goal is to create the political will to end poverty with Congress. So our work is primarily focused with working with Congress on all issues related to housing. Housing and poverty in particular. As an aside, I'm also the current chair of the American Bar Association's Commission on Homelessness and Poverty, where we educate the public writ large on all legal issues that concern homelessness and poverty. So it's a broad mandate, but we work with other entities within the ABA, including the Forum on Affordable Housing, the Real Property section. So there's also opportunities where I get to work with the housing industry in that context. That to say, as a recovering attorney, I just have to say, nothing I mentioned in this podcast is attributable to the ABA. I don't want to speak on behalf of the ABA or results, but my own views.
Get the legal opinion in there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you've got to have that legal disclaimer. You've got to have it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
BJ, would you go next?
Hi, thank you for having me, Katie. My name is Vijay Yadlapati, and I'm the Senate Democratic lobbyist for the National Association of Realtors. We are the largest trade group in the country with 1.5 million members. My main focus is ensuring that there are laws in place for a robust real estate market and overall economy. While we tend to focus on the residential side, we do have a significant portion of our memberships that do commercial real estate in all sectors. I always like to tell members of Congress that while we are residential, we do play a big role in the commercial area.
So, Tyler, you want to go next?
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie. Thanks for being here. Thanks for letting me be here. Tyler Craddock. I'm the Governmental Affairs Director for the National Association of Residential Property Managers, for a trade association that represents property managers, particularly those who manage single-family properties, as well as some small multifamily stuff like duplexes, quads, eightplexes, sort of deal. Most of our owners are those who own just a few units. So it's truly what one might call the mom and pop or small business type owners. For NARPM, I handle a significant piece of their federal portfolio. With ours, instead of dividing by issue, we divide a little bit by party. So I mostly work with Republican offices. I have a colleague, Troy Garrett, who works mostly with Democratic offices, although there's obviously some overlap there. And then also with NARPM, we both help provide some support to our state and local chapters on state and local issues.
Awesome. And lastly, my friend Maria.
Well, again, Katie, thank you for having us. And I want to thank Michael, VJ, and Tyler for also joining in this conversation. They are three people that I work with a lot on the Choice and Affordable Housing Act. We are a small part of a larger group of, I think at this point, 15 or 20 organizations that are working in coalition to try to get this bill passed. And so I thank them for helping us represent this bill. I am Maria Spencer. I'm with the National Apartment Association. I'm on the lobbying team. We have members all over the country that do phenomenal work. I have the pleasure of working on the lobbying team to represent our members before Congress. I work both House and Senate, and I also work Dems and Republicans. So we have the range on our team, and that's how we kind of configure as lobbyists.
It's such an amazing panel. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Saturday Night Live's the skit, The Surprise Lady. It's a Kristen Wiig skit where she's just like, I'm so excited. That's been me getting ready for this recording today. So if I just throw myself out the window, like, I'm just so excited. But in all seriousness, thank you guys for the work that you're doing on the federal level to try to get this passed. And for listeners who don't know, when we see these letters come out in support, and you've got at the bottom the logos for the organizations that are in support, we write a lot of letters together from what I've seen. Am I correct in that? That's what I thought. So for listeners, if you see that, this is the collaboration. They get together and collaborate. And so you guys are very well established in your careers. And starting with Michael, how did you get your start lobbying for housing issues?
Great question. So I guess I have to talk about my career path, which has been largely unusual. As I mentioned before, I'm a recovering attorney at this point, so I do a lot of lobbying and policy work. But many, many years ago, I started my legal career at the National Homelessness Law Center. So my primary task there as a staff attorney was to advocate on behalf of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. So it's like the only federal law that really deals with addressing homelessness across the country. And to this day, that law is still very much alive. And in addition to that, as I mentioned before, I've been involved with the American Bar Association's Commission on Homelessness and Poverty. So that's really where I get to do a lot of the legal writing and policy work with respect to legal issues concerning people experiencing homelessness and poverty. And then lastly, how I got to start lobbying for housing issues really was when I was a staff attorney at Bay Area Legal Aid. So it's a legal aid organization based in San Francisco, California. I was an eviction defense attorney at the time. So I was on the other side of the folks that Maria, Tyler, and Vijay work with. But nonetheless, that was very, very informative, largely because a lot of my clients were actually either they live in public housing or they were Section 8 voucher holders. And so I got a preview, kind of like front seat, so to speak, in terms of how the program works, how all these actors, the PHAs, the landlords, and the renters come to play when we're talking about it in the context of eviction. And so that was really, really, that was really, really interesting and grounding experience for me, because as a part of that job, I also got to negotiate stipulations and settlement agreements with landlords. And that's really kind of that really set the tone on how I work with the housing industry with Maria, because then I learned a lot how to negotiate, and we can talk about this later at greater length. But I'll leave it at that. But that's how I got started in terms of understanding the housing issues. And then when I joined Results about 4.5 years ago, when I moved back to DC from San Francisco, California, that's really where I started working with our grassroots volunteers on all things housing related.
Awesome. I like to say this a lot on here when people share their stories. Your steps were being ordered. You had no idea at the time that the experience that you were having was going to set you up for the career that you have now. And that's amazing. I don't know if you know this, and a legal disclaimer here for my firm, but I work for a firm that we are landlord attorneys, and we are eviction focused, and that's what we do. And some of our attorneys have come from the legal aid side and have seen both sides of that coin. It makes you a better, more rounded expert, because you've seen how it works on both sides.
Absolutely. I think it's very grounding. It's very informative. And to your point, it does help you see the bigger picture. And so when Maria and others and I talk, right, it's all in that kind of dynamic and context.
I just dropped my mic. It was a mic drop moment.
Are you ready to fly out the window?
I know, right? I know, for sure. And I want to talk to you offline too, Michael, because I am involved in the Greenville Homeless Alliance here in our city, and Greenville Together. It's a United Way public-private partnership that we're looking to end homelessness here in Greenville. So we'll talk offline about that too. I'd love to get your input, maybe connect you with some of our local people here in some of their initiatives.
And we do have volunteers in South Carolina, just FYI.
Oh, wonderful. I'll have to make sure that our folks are connected. And VJ, how did you get your start in advocacy for the housing industry?
Very non-traditional route for a lobbyist. The usual route is working on the Hill 10, 15, 20 years, and then getting into whatever niche that you worked on the Hill on. For me, I actually started off as an intern and then ended up becoming a contract lobbyist in the state of Illinois. I had a lot of different clients, mostly non-for-profits, educational associations and companies like the United Way of Illinois. After that, I just decided I wanted to try something different and something more in line in the business world. So I ended up actually getting a job with the CCIM Institute and Institute of Real Estate Management, and was able to run their government affairs for a little bit. And that helped me transition to the National Association of Realtors, where I ended up doing their commercial policy work, then financial services, and then eventually switched on over to the lobbying team. So very non-traditional.
So you worked for IREM, is that right?
I did, yes, for several years, yeah.
And the realtors have such a huge name in lobbying in general for the industry. And I'm even looking to work with them here in South Carolina on some of our housing policies that we're trying to get passed here. And my best friend's a realtor. She's with Berkshire Hathaway, Cedar and Joyner. So shout out to JD. And she was just in DC for the fly-in a couple of weeks ago. So you guys do very well. And you raise so much money for PAC. For your RPAC.
Yes, yeah. We usually in the top three. I think the last couple of years we've been one or two. So yeah, it has been a blessing in terms of helping my abilities in terms of being a lobbyist.
And Tyler, how did you get your start?
Well, somewhat traditional. After I got out of graduate school, and actually I was going to go to graduate school and be an academic, but got out of graduate school, worked around a couple of things, but started out as a legislative staffer, but interestingly enough on the state level. So I worked through, I'm a product of the state legislature. The legislator for whom I worked chaired the land use sub. So we worked with a lot of those issues. Also, during the time I had a real estate license. So VJ, I have hauled and hoped, right? Got Mom and Dad and little Johnny and spilling ice cream on the car seat, and they're done that. But then my first government affairs job after being a legislative staffer, as I worked in local lobbying for our local HBA in the Richmond, Virginia area for the Home Building Association. From there, did land use and construction for the state chamber, then to the State Manufactured Housing Association, and now here. So this is NARPM is my first federal gig, and it's been like drinking from a hydrant. Of course, with friends like Maria, they made that transition a heck of a lot easier. But that's how I got here.
That's awesome. And our firm, like I said, excited to be members. We've recently joined our single family sector of our business is fast growing, which is sad to say because of what we do. But if they need the help, we're here to help them. And we're glad to have you guys as a resource.
Well, wonderful. We're glad to have you all as members and look forward to course, working for y'all, and of course, working with everybody who's on with us today.
And Maria, how did you get your start?
Well, so I'm the baby in all of this, I guess. I walked in probably first week and met VJ and some other folks, and I'm real naive and green, and they were saying all kinds of stuff at dinner, and I believed it all. But I've been lobbying for many years. I was in healthcare. I started out lobbying in healthcare in New York State, and then I moved to DC. But I've only been working in the housing space for 4 years since I started with NAA. And people are like, that is a little bit unusual in that most people don't make that kind of a shift or transition, particularly after all of this time. But I was looking for a change. Doing something a little bit different. I was working on some issue campaigns in a couple of states. So I've done state and federal work, but it's been really fun and exciting to get into the housing sector. People are like, healthcare was so complicated, but I'm like, there are a lot of similarities, but there are some differences. Some good, some bad, but that's a story for another day. But I've been in the industry for 4 years, but I've been lobbying for more than I care to share on here, more than 20. We'll just put it that way. But it's the concept is very similar. Lobbying is lobbying, but working with folks like these guys on this coalition, and learning a lot from them, learning a lot from our other partners like NMHC, learning from our team. It's the learning curve has been that much shorter because of all the collaboration that we have amongst our groups.
And it really does take that collaboration. And I'm finding the more that I get into this work, how niched it is. Like, you don't just sit around with your friends that don't do this. You're like, oh my God, let me tell you, their eyes will glaze over. They're like, say no more. But when you get together with folks like you guys, we could talk all day about these things. And it takes more people coming to the table, because one person can't do it. And you have to be tenacious. Like, my own state representative, he's newly elected last year. My representative ran against my congressman, so that was a little awkward. But Congressman won, so I have a new state representative. He came to our apartment association meeting yesterday, and he thanked me for continuing to beat the drum. I laugh and say I stalk our members, but I do, like, for real. Like, I will follow them on social media, find out where they are, know where they are in the district, and I just show up. I'll tell folks, work until you don't have to introduce yourself. Work until you show up. They know who you are. And that's like, one of our representatives did not go back on the YIMBY Act. And I went to a meeting where he was there. I didn't say anything about YIMBY. The next day I get an email from congress.gov, an alert on the bill. Guess who had co-sponsored? Him. So you work. It takes that collaboration. It takes more people. So I hope that folks that are listening, that are interested in getting involved, like, in this respect, will reach out. And if you're in South Carolina, Maria, you have North and South Carolina for NAA? Yep. So Maria's North and South Carolina. So if we have folks that are listening and want to get more involved in advocacy in your state, please reach out, and Maria will put you to work. She will definitely put you to work. And so the Choice and Affordable Housing Act is a piece of legislation that you guys have collaborated heavily on. How would passing it move the needle to address the nation's housing crisis? And anybody who wants to take it, any y'all, go right ahead. Come on.
I don't want to go first. I've been going first, but I'm happy to have Vijay or Tyler maybe take this on.
I think, oh yeah, go ahead, Tyler. Yep,
No,
go for
BJ,
it.
go ahead, my friend.
The short answer is, I mean, it's moving folks that need housing into stock that's already there and reducing those barriers. Whether it's inspection requirements all the way to incentivizing landlord participation. So in my eyes, it's just it's low-hanging fruit, but something that can make a big difference in terms of opening up supply.
Exactly. The way we look at it is, just the very logic of the bill, which is, hey, in a perfect world, section the Housing Choice Voucher Program, Section 8 works so well that PHAs almost don't have to recruit, right? Landlords come to them wanting to participate. And so at least particularly within the choices available to consumers who hold a housing choice voucher in a given market, it increases the choices available to them. Um, and for us, that's really important because the program the program itself, uh, it continuing to be sustained, to grow, to prosper, if you will, is important because it's the one program that lets us one of the programs that truly lets us leverage the free market. And with given the portability of vouchers, there's so many more positive, good things that go with that, like deconcentration of poverty, um, the ability of tenants to protect themselves from being trapped in substandard housing or exploitive circumstances, right? Because they have that exit option, right? Your housing support is tied to you, not to the structure. So I think that it moves the needle both qualitatively and quantitatively. Is I think the way we would look at it.
Yeah, I think I want to piggyback from what Tyler was saying about this like deconcentrating poverty, right? Because built within the housing choice voucher program is the use of fair market rents or small area fair market rents that account for the regional geographical differences in the housing market, right? A voucher would look a lot different and cost different if you live in San Francisco versus, for example, a rural area in California. And so, yes, I think I echo what Tyler was saying in terms of like moving the needle in terms of deconcentrating poverty. But I think for me, I don't want to look at it through the perspective of housing supply, but rather the broader ecosystem of affordable housing in the United States. And I think it's easy to see this bill as only addressing the supply, right? We're always talking about supply and demand. But in some ways, it helps with the demand for housing affordability too. And that's in large part due to how the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher program is structured, right? I see it as a three-legged stool where the program is administered by public housing agencies or authorities or PHAs. And then you have the tenant paying the portion of the rent while the government subsidizes the other portion of it. And then you have the landlords, right? And so in that three-legged stool, if we're missing one, if we don't have landlords participating, then the program doesn't quite work, right? And lastly, I would say, like in terms of moving the needle, as an anti-poverty organization at Results, and also my work at the ABA Commission on Homelessness and Poverty, we see the Housing Choice Voucher Program as part of a bigger set of tools to prevent homelessness, right? To make housing affordable. And I know I don't want to beat us to this, but I'd love if we could talk later about like some of the challenges, but like it's all about prevention. And I think we need to do a better job of connecting the dots and how this legislation, if we actually have more landlords participating in the program, then in turn we'll have more tenants and households who are able to live in this available housing, as Vijay had said. And that all leads like further upstream, preventing homelessness, preventing people from entering the homeless system of care in the first place.
Michael, I think you make a really good point. And, that was one that, this coalition is unique in that we all come at this from different perspectives. Most of us here are representing the industry side, but Michael and I think half a dozen other groups come at it from the advocate side of the perspective. And, it's always good to go into these conversations with members of Congress and sharing both of those sides of the perspective and letting them know that we're all holding hands on this. And the point that Michael makes, I think, is very powerful, particularly when we're going in and talk to members' offices and he says, the value that, the advocate groups see in having landlords being a part of that process. And that's really important. For our members, we want to make sure that we're keeping people housed. We're all in the business of keeping people housed. And that's number one. So to your point, Michael, when we're talking about homelessness, when we're talking about making sure that there's enough supply, I think you make a really good point. But, one of the things, a couple things that we really like about the bill is, we know that Section 8 is a very good program when it works like it's supposed to, when it works like it's intended. But we also can recognize, all of us across the board, that it needs reforms. And, to streamline some of the inspection processes, that makes a huge difference in my members and our members being willing to participate in the program. And so, that is one of the big reasons why we want to work on it in terms of, making sure that, at least from our perspective, we want to make sure that the program remains voluntary. That is really important to make sure that participation is available and is there. And again, all of this goes down to exactly what you're saying, Michael. And I think that sometimes that doesn't always translate well, particularly on the industry side. And that was one of the things that, Katie, when you asked about kind of where we came from before, I was in the healthcare space. We did a lot of things together, industry and advocates. There were lots of things that we partnered on. And so when I came to NAA and I became the lead person on our team to work on this bill, it was very important for me to try to bring together in places that we can be collaborative. And I know that we were doing this before, but working more closely with our industry partners as well as our advocate partners. So we really do, at least I and NAA appreciates the partnership that we get from both sides of this. There are some things that we are going to disagree on, but this happens to be one that we don't. And so we really want to put our best foot forward on something so important for all of us, like the Choice and Affordable Housing Act. And I think the last thing I'll say about that is that the other part of this equation in terms of this coalition work, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the partnership that we have with the lead sponsors of this bill on the House and the Senate side, Senator Kramer and his team, Senator Coons and his staff, and then Representative Mike Lawler, and Representative Cleaver and their team. All of them, like, we're all working on this together, and that's really where we hopefully will be successful in getting this done sooner than later.
I don't want folks, listeners that are members, to forget about this. Is one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this on today's episode, is because, with Advocate this year, I think our attendees for the fly-in are often focused on the issues that are up there on the screen. And this year we had the TCJA and we had the CARES Act bill. But this is still, like, this changes lives. Like, this will fundamentally change lives for both the landlord, the housing provider, and the resident. Like, this is really, we are America's housing providers as, NA members, a lot of us, and I still hold a property management license here in South Carolina. You want your residents housed. You want to have a great relationship with your PHA. And this is a piece of legislation that really should pull at your heartstrings to speak to your member about, because this is changing lives. This is preventing, like to Michael's point, this is going to prevent homelessness. We don't want to see these things in our community. We don't want this to happen to our neighbors. And it's so important to go into these meetings with members of Congress with that information too. And do you guys go together, or do you just say, like, we are all singing from the same songbook here?
Try to corral everybody. The schedules are tough, and we are all, we try to do meetings together. But I know that each of us in our lobbying that we do separately will mention and/or advocate for this bill as well. So it's a little bit of both. And it just really depends on availability, but we do try to make, when we can. We've done some meetings as groups of all of us, kind of, different people in the groups, to go in together. And again, that's really a powerful message when members see us all together, when they see the letter with all the different names of groups on it, whether they're a D or an R. It's definitely helpful to work in concert with each other on this.
And to piggyback on Maria, we also do events for individual members of Congress. And so what we try to do in the housing space is to do housing related events. And so we'll bring these bills up to the member of Congress.
Sorry, go ahead, Mike. No, I was gonna say, we sometimes do some things together. I was gonna say, Michael, I think it's where you and I met. It was a meeting on the Senate side, if I remember correctly. But it is, and it's extraordinarily helpful for members to see, again, like, hey, the folks generally I'm aligned with, different members align with different groups of folks. Hey, my friends support this bill, but over here, just as important to them may be, hey, the folks sometimes who aren't that happy with me, that I'm not going to get attacked if I support this bill, right? So sort of the old, you know, push and pull kind of thing.
I was just going to say, I think kudos to Maria for being a professional cat herder at this point, getting us all together in the same room. Because it's a lot of work, to be honest, right? To get everyone, industry and advocates in the same room to be talking about this issue, like one of the few issues where we all agree, right? So I think it's been a delight working with the industry on this. But I think for results and for the public writ large, I think the role that we play, in addition to the work that advocates and the industry folks do, is to really uplift that like underlying basis for this bill, which is the housing affordability. It's just not there, right? And I could tell you right now, because we have volunteers who write op-eds, we have volunteers who write LTEs, not necessarily on point with this, right? It's not like you see run into an average person in the street and and that person would be willing to talk about housing choice vouchers, right? And so we kind of deconstruct and break it down so that we understand exactly the dynamics that are happening on the ground, so that we can then make the case to Congress and to lawmakers that this is very much needed, right? We talked about housing affordability. We talked about homelessness. These are the things that our grassroots talk about and are very, very much concerned about. And so we uplift those voices, and then we share those voices to folks on the Hill, to the lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats, independents, and then have this group, this cohort, kind of uplift the need for this particular legislation.
It's so important to educate the members too, because a lot of times we are their best education. They don't know what they don't know. And when you tell them, we are leaving Americans in your district unhoused because this program needs change, then they kind of start listening like, because housing isn't a partisan issue. It's a people issue. It's something that, like you said, it's the great connector in a lot of ways, because it's something that everyone needs, is that basic need of shelter, and a shelter that you can afford, quite frankly. And going into these meetings, and to your point there too, Tyler, you have to be careful sometimes, because they would support it on its face, but sometimes there are some things that come along with, if they sponsor it, then they might get some kickback from another group. And that's kind of how I've learned some things in doing this dance that they call politics, that you may not get that co-sponsorship, but they won't kill it, so to speak. They're not going to vote against it or kill it, but they might not co-sponsor. They'll agree with you, but they won't put their name on it. And VJ, I know you primarily lobby the Senate. How are they on the Choice Act?
Yeah, so I focus primarily on the Senate Democratic side, and they've been wonderful. As most of you know, on the Senate side, the bill is very bipartisan, and for anything to pass these days in the Senate, it has to be bipartisan. So we already have step one there. I think that the issue is generally more on the Republican side, and it tends to do with anything to do with cost these days, especially now that we have a reconciliation bill that is going to cost several $1 trillion. So now I think that part of that caucus is trying to rein in costs, and so even if it is a good program, it's going to be scrutinized. And then I think there's also the stigma or perception by some that this is a welfare program, or the people that are using this don't deserve it, or we're exacerbating the issues, which is far from the truth. But once you start talking to them, I think most of the folks do understand that this is a good program and does more for society than if it was not there. So I think those are the biggest issues this year. The focus is going to be on tax reconciliation. So there's going to be very few opportunities for other pieces of legislation this year. So I see this bill more as a long-term bill, just wrapped into maybe a housing package. But again, I don't see it moving in the short term, and it's not because of its merits. It's because of what is happening politically within Washington, D.C.
And you're destigmatizing it. When you're speaking to the member of Congress, a lot of times you have to say a teacher could qualify for this, a firefighter, a police officer. Like where I am in Greenville, the average rent is $1,451. And if a teacher is making $50,000 a year, that's 2.9 times the rent. They're barely going to, as a property manager, and I would say 2.9 rounded up to 3, you're in. But that's still, cutting it. That's squeaking it there. So if they had that gap, that equity, so to speak, in the middle, it would help soften that burden for them. And it's so important that we educate them and know that the bill really is, it's good on its face. But I've seen the same thing. Our South Carolina delegation, you guys are very familiar with the makeup, and the same challenges that you're hearing there are what we're hearing when we have our meetings in the district as well. But Maria prepares us for that. So
I think the VJ makes a great point about, it's not because of the merits. It's sometimes the politics. It's sometimes, a lack of understanding and awareness. And remember, not all of these members, particularly if you're talking about on the Senate side, they're dealing with the whole state, and they're dealing with a range of issues. Their team is not focused once you get off of the committees that work on these issues, it's a steeper learning curve as well. And so, we really kind of work to, I have always said you have to educate before you can advocate. And then, you let the lobbyists come in and, we do the easy part, right? But, none of it's easy when you've got all of those different things at play. But this is, we all obviously feel like this is a great bill. And I do believe, without being Pollyanna-ish about it, I do believe that, at one day, it'll get done. We whether you slice it up, but, we know there's a lot of truths, right? That there need to be reforms to the program, that we need to look at affordability, and that, and looking at the price and the costs, and that, we need participation by owners, and we need to keep people housed. So it's got all of the things, right? It's got all the ingredients. It's just a matter of when we're going to, put it all together and let it bake. But, it is, most of the challenge with this bill right now is the price tag. And again, different people are at different stages of that. But that's why all of us kind of singing off the same song sheet about this is so important. Just making sure that we're continuing to educate and, keep chipping away at this, and, dealing with procedural issues. And if all we have to worry about is the procedural stuff on this, then we have come a long, long way.
And Tyler, as someone who mainly works with property managers, what type of feedback are you getting on the Hill about this bill?
Well, as I say, that it's my experience is, even though I have a little bit different angle, because I mostly work with Republicans, mostly work on the House side, just because just raw numbers, right? More folks over there. Very similar. I mean, I will say there's a baseline understanding, and I think I've experienced this in every office, that the program as it exists, that it needs some tweaking, needs a little fixing. And generally what I get is like VJ and Maria alluded to, I'll get the concerns about the cost. In the last Congress, I had offices say, "Hey, we've been told," and I would say this is more acute on the House side, or was more acute on the House side. We were told, "Hey, you know what? We can't really move anything that costs money, right?" So, but now on other provisions, like you get into inspections, all sorts of stuff like that, the structure, I call them the structural changes. There's really no pushback there. Most are, "Hey, that's great." But it's the cost. And then, but what I do try to do is just, sort of like, VJ was talking about, that he does too, is, give a little bit of understanding, just, say, "Hey, look, I just represent the guys and girls who manage these homes. Let me tell you why this is important to us, to try and get it beyond beyond just, well, do we think this consumer is worthy or this one isn't or whatever, and just say, look, A lot of my folks work in states where, they have source of funds in credit, so they're required to participate. So let's make this, and I said, and then the folks that don't, that are in, say, like, South Carolina, where you don't have source, where let's give those property owners more valuable options to put people in their property. So I try to turn it around to where, in this case, hey, this is the folks I represent and why it's important to them. So, uh, but yeah, very, very, very similar responses that we get.
I saw that too. I had a question from a member when we did an in-district meeting last year. Is this going to increase the deficit and that kind of thing? They very concerned. So hearing the same thing, back here in South Carolina as well.
But
and Michael,
where we've been able to be successful, I'm sorry, Katie, I know we're talking about the price tag and these guys can attest to this as well. I think we've tried to do a really good job to break down what's included in those costs. And maybe we'll get to this in part of the discussion, because I think that's really important, is what those actual costs are. And that certainly helps. And we continue to work at fine tuning our messaging about the costs, and I think that going through that almost line by line, particularly on the Republican side, is extremely helpful, because a lot of times people come in and they don't have a good way to talk about that. They say, "Oh, well, and they have a number that they can't justify, or that they can't explain what the costs are going to, because it's not so much that they're anti-cost, is they want to make sure that they're getting an ROI for supporting something that has a cost attached to us. I just want to, kind of make, just talk about that a little bit. And I get a little frustrated sometimes, because, we are talking about most of the cost of this is for the deposit and the gap in the deposit, which goes back to the reforms that you need in the program. And I remind folks that most of that came from, quite honestly, on the Republican side, and having a discussion with them. And, maybe sometimes it's a philosophical discussion about why this is not anti-conservative, right? This is very much in line with traditional conservative values and approaches to how we, talk about this. And we've got some very conservative members and folks like Senator Kramer that are on this bill. So it's all of those different things that go into it. But yeah, I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah, and that does help. When you mentioned the security deposit part, that helps, because then when I say, look, our property owners we represent, that's usually the number one or number two reason they don't want to participate, is because if there is damage, and damage happens, right? You own rental property, damage happens. There has to be a mechanism for the property owner to be made whole. And if the money's not there, it's not there.
And people understand that. Members understand that.
Sometimes, depending on the staffer you're with, and Maria, VJ, Michael, y'all know the kind of staffer I'm talking about, where you can get all philosophical, and you can remind them, like, hey, this idea of the voucher system, came out of the conservative resurgence in the 70s. And usually I'll say, I don't know how correct this is, but I don't know how completely perfect it is, but I'll say, this was a good old Jack Kemp supply sider approach to providing housing supports. I mean, and it came out of that whole, the 70s, the pushback against the Great Society and, whatever. And so, I'll go into my history professor nerddom.
Whatever it takes.
That's right.
Whatever it takes to get them.
But there's only certain staffers you do that with. Others, you're just like, nah, you know what? I'm good.
You got to perfect your spiel. That's right.
That's right. You don't sell the steak, you sell the sizzle, but you got to know which sizzle matters.
That's right. That's right. And I'll tell folks that are intimidated, because I chair several, government affairs committees, and people really get their knees knocking, afraid to go and speak and educate. And it's like, look, if you can sell your property to someone who does not know anything about it, you are the expert. You can sell the rental housing industry to a member of Congress or their staff. Chances are they've lived in an apartment. Chances are the staff, they probably rent right now. They are probably facing their own challenges. It's some of those positions aren't exactly the top paying. They're working their way up, but they can relate. And so I tell them the same applies. If you're an industry advocate, a leasing consultant can go in and explain this just as well as any of us can.
We are blessed in the housing industry. Whether it's any of our memberships, we have some really smart, great folk, and they do well when they go on the Hill. And so, but you're right, Katie. Sometimes get nervous, and you just you want to help be there, empower them, be their buddy, and help empower them. But you're so right. We have some really great folk, and I've traveled in realtor circles for mid-year meetings. I've seen my own members. I've NAA folk. And my God, I think I've been in some meetings where some of your folks were in too. We have incredibly smart members we represent, and so they're so good at that. And sometimes they're very much their own best advocates, and
I said,
that makes
Michael, do
life
you
a
have
lot
some
easier.
advocates? Like, Michael, do you have some advocates in this district? Can we get them to do a meeting for us? Can we get them to do? And Michael say, I think I do, and we go forth, and but it's all of those pieces together, because you give them the philosophical, and then they need to hear from the boots on the ground folks, which are the kind of folks that Michael represents too.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking is next time we decide to do a meeting on the choice bill, Michael, see who you've got that you can send with our delegation, and we'll team up, we'll tag team. And so Results members are both owner, operators, and residents. What is Results' interest in this bill?
Sure. So I guess just to backtrack a little bit, when I talk to some of our members and the general public about this, right, I hear the things that we're all talking about here, which is housing affordability and homelessness prevention. I hear that from the renter side. I hear that from the landlord and homeowner and developer side too. I would say there's also some frustration from some of our members who are well-meaning and wanted to participate in the program and rent to a Section 8 voucher holder, but unable to do so because they run into some of the frustrations that other landlords run into, right? And this is something that Marie had alluded to before, which is what this bill is trying to accomplish, which is streamline the housing choice voucher program, right? There's a lot of frustration in the inspection delays, for example. And I think the reality is that Section 8 has a lot of rules that need to be followed for the PHA, the landlord, and the tenant too, right? And I would say that there is appetite for reforming some of the elements of the housing choice voucher program so that it is a win-win for all parties involved. But I think our position goes back to how the program operates, right? Like we need both landlords and households to use Section 8. So without participating landlords, it'll be hard for someone to use a voucher, particularly in like high or in a tight housing market across the country. And this is something that we actually hear from our conversations on the Hill when I sit in some of the meetings that our volunteers do, right? In several jurisdictions, it's not so much the number of vouchers that are available in the community that's the issue, right? But rather the low utilization rate or the ability of households to use the voucher in the rental market because there are just not enough properties or landlords renting under the program. And then one last thought, in the grand scheme of things, going back to my point earlier, it's all about homelessness prevention, right? We see this as a part of a bigger set of tools to prevent homelessness, to end homelessness, to make housing affordable for all. Because after all, we all agree that we need more housing affordability in this country, right? I mean, I'm not even going to talk to you about how expensive the DC housing market is, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And the more I get involved with some of the stakeholder groups and that kind of thing, I see that we all want the same thing. We all have the same. We may disagree on how to get there in some respects, but we all want the same thing. And collaboration, sometimes we're going to disagree, sometimes we're going to agree. But results and other advocacy groups support this bill, obviously. How has it been working on this issue with the industry for you guys? Been a positive experience, it sounds like, so far?
Yeah, I mean, I give the Senate Democratic perspective. It's been great. I probably have had the easiest job. I don't think, and I've gotten any pushback on the bill. I think from just a general Democratic perspective, uh, they always want to do a little bit more. So more money, more, it's like, oh, well, we got to get some Republican support here. So can't go too far. But yeah, I've been loving it. I think we have a good coalition in place, and that's not always the case, or at least what I've dealt with on other issues in the past. So as you all know, for anything to get done in DC, you have to have a big coalition, a wide casting net, and that will eventually get to your goal. So I think we're quite on our way there. So we got the first step, as I mentioned earlier, about having a very bipartisan bill. We got some really good members in the Senate and in the House that are for it. So I think now we just have to wait for our opportunity politically to see where we could move this bill the quickest.
And I guess for me, it's been an interesting experience and wonderful experience to build relationships, particularly with the industries, right? Like I love meeting with Maria. We talk shop when we're not on like Hill meetings. But I think coming into this work, for the longest time, I've been doing a lot of advocacy in the housing and homelessness space. I run into a lot of frustrations. And I think one of the most surprising things after having worked with Maria in the industry is that, oh, shoot, like I didn't realize that we all run into the same problems. We all run into the same challenges. We all run into the same limits when we are actually working or trying to work with Congress to pass this type of bill.
And I think for me, coming from what I was used to working in healthcare, this to me seemed like a really good opportunity to lean into that a little bit more. Kind of some of the lessons learned from there is like some of the most successful things that we worked on, it were things where we worked with, industry and advocates. And again, I know that this has been going on. It predates me. I wasn't the convener of this idea. But it does take some work, but like having like I get calls from our advocate partners, what's going on with the bill or what can we do for this? And, volunteers and the same thing from our industry partners. And I can say, from the industry side, I did a lot of things in the healthcare space, but we are extremely collaborative in the housing space. And it's so refreshing to be able to be with a group of folks that we're all kind of saying the same thing. So whether I'm in the meeting or whether Tyler's in the meeting, I know coming back that we're going to get, that Tyler said what I would have said and vice versa. And so it's really just a refreshing experience for me for the last 4 years to be, working with these guys. And I know they, I'm sometimes a little shameless. I'm like, can you do this? Can you give me a little bit more? And I don't overstep, but, we've been able to do a lot of this in no small part because of, the four folks that are here, but also the rest of the groups. Like everybody has been involved and engaged on these issues. NMHC, the home builders, the Low Income Housing Council, the Habitat for Humanity, like all these different groups. We've all just kind of been doing this together because we all have different perspectives, but we all still believe in getting this bill over the finish line. And when the politics align, we're going to be ready, and I'm going to be ready, and we're going to all be ready.
And yeah, and I think we all of us understand that, given the fact that it takes some level of consensus to get anything, regardless, we all are going to get our sort of half a loaf out of this deal because, it really, it just doesn't work that it's one singular faction will come in and take a whole loaf, right? So, but it's been good. I think we've all recognized, okay, we all have sort of a get that we're getting out of this. And it's just it's politics after all. It's not garden club. It's politics. But that said, I mean, it's been a wonderful coalition to work in, because a lot of times DC is a big town, and a lot of times, we get stuck just sort of laboring in our own vineyard, and sometimes when you get your head up and work a little bit, and work a little bit and hoe the same row as everybody else, and together it opens the doors to a lot of other opportunities to be able to collaborate and do some great things.
I mean, I'd love it if it were a garden club. I'm loving the references here in the vineyard as well, Tyler.
Don't ask me, because I do not have a green thumb. I will kill everything in your garden. So you guys do that. I'll enjoy, what comes out of it. And maybe VJ can give us some good wines after the wine press is done.
Definitely.
Now that's the positive side. We kind of talked about the financial aspect of the bill being a challenge. What other challenges have you guys seen in trying to get support for this bill?
I would point to two. I would say one is I would say urgency, and what I mean by that. So and Maria, VJ, Michael, y'all can go, I'd say no, if y'all think I'm wrong here. But I don't think any of us have walked into an office where somebody said, no, Section 8, that works just fine. We don't need to do anything with it. Right? And even I think we've had offices where, hey, all good. I've even had especially some Senate offices in my travels. I don't think we're not that worked up about the cost. We're good on that. Right? So, but getting, there's things people are supportive of. And then in especially in Washington, there's the hill they'll die on, right? Getting it to that top level of triage of, like, this is, I support this, I'll burn capital on this, are two different things. And so getting the urgency, that I think that's and it's not, I mean, it's just the challenge. That's the challenge to every bill that we do, because especially in the times that we're in, and reconciliation bills and budget fights floating around, and all of these other major issues, for the biggest time there was this little thing called COVID, right? So there's that. And then I would think the other, and I think we've all hit like around it, but it is this idea that we all know that to get this together, there's going to have to be some level of consensus. Right? You got to get 60 votes in the Senate right from the get-go. But probably, you know what? In either caucus, you're going to lose some votes on one side or the other. So there's got to be a larger level of consensus. Okay, well, normally right into the legislative world, all right, well, we find out, like, okay, what can we get 51% of votes for here? We put together. But, and I don't know if y'all have had this experience or not, but I had a conversation in a member's office, and I said, well, I mean, yeah, there's a negotiation maybe to be had at some point, but if you start there and they're there, then to get there, the way I put it, just in a term that I thought they would understand, I said, you're going to have to swallow a couple of toads. So you need to be thinking about what toads you're going to swallow. And so that, when you combine it with the urgency, right, to get something, if people are willing to burn capital, then usually they're willing to swallow a couple of toads to get there. Right, but we got to build the urgency to swallow a couple of toads to get there. So I think that's just been my experience on it. Y'all's may be very different.
No, I think I want to piggyback from what you were saying, Tyler. I think for us, one of the challenges that we're seeing too, and this is me speaking with respect to the current political and legal climate, right? Like just getting airtime from Congress is challenging, right? Like Congress has a ton of priorities. And I think the experience that we have is that these offices see a lot of proposals, a lot of bills. And I think when we're talking about a political body that has very high turnover with staff, right, it's almost like a few months later, we let this simmer down, let other pressing issues take over, and then we revisit it, and we might be dealing with a new staff, right? And so I think that there's that ongoing, sustainable outreach, education, for everyone involved, not just the lawmakers, not just the aides, but also the people, because we also need more people talking about this. We need more constituents talking about this. We need more folks in the housing industry. We need more folks in the advocacy groups, but we also need folks outside of these circles, right? And I think that's ultimately the challenge, is that I think it was like Tyler and Vijay talking about earlier, like DC is like, in order to get things done in DC, you have to build coalitions. And the challenge is like, how do we actually get other industries and other groups, not just the housing advocacy groups, to be on board with this? And especially when you're looking at it from different perspectives, right? Like housing prevention or homelessness prevention, that's a big deal. But I think it's hard for people to understand and connect those dots, right? And so part of the challenge is really continuing the educational component of like what this bill is about.
Yeah, to me, I agree with that. And everybody's nodding, and it's like getting to that critical mass. I mean, I think that this bill has been around a few years, a few Congresses. And, I think from a policy perspective, it's gotten most of the kinks out, and it's pretty well baked, right? So now we're at that place where what we're talking about is the politics, and Tyler said it perfectly. So, Tyler, I'm so proud of you today. You're doing good, brother. It's like, getting that critical mass, and we're looking, we've brought in some other, voices into this coalition. We're doing all of those different things, but it's like you said, getting us to that. There's no sense of urgency of you got to get this bill done, right? And so in this year, it's everything is tax. I'm like, if I can get something taxed in this bill, maybe it'll pop up, but it's not. So it is what it is. So you're fighting against that right now. But like, I think that's a great point, Tyler. There's no, people recognize that the Section 8 program needs reform, and it needs to be the bureaucracy needs to be streamlined. And yeah, Congress is kind of talking about that right now. But like, what is the critical mass that's going to get this done? And the one analogy I can kind of think of, and I don't want to compare these two on the same level, but like, you guys have been around a little bit. When we did healthcare reform, it didn't happen until it happened. And it got to a place, it had been at critical mass for many years until whatever that magic sauce was in that last 6 months, and up until almost literally the day that it passed, that no one was sure it was going to get done. Now, this isn't that big of a bill, but it's that it had some things and a bunch of stars aligned to get it done. And that's really kind of what we all kind of rack our brains about. What I rack my brains about is like, how in the world do I figure out a way that the next thing that we need to do to get this done? And I talked to VJ, and I'm like, VJ, I need, let's talk through this. I talked to Tyler and I, a couple weeks ago, we had coffee. I'm going to meet with Michael tomorrow. And that's what we do. It's like, what is it going to take? And it could be something very, very, like, you'd be surprised at some of the things over the years that we've probably all experienced, where a bill went from just kind of being out there to today it's moving, and we're getting it done, and it's over. And we look back and we're like, people are like, wow, that was great. But it was like, yeah, but we've been working on this for like 6 years or 7 years. So it's just getting that critical mass to get it over there. So Tyler, I think you said it perfectly.
Yeah, and it's just it's a function of Congress being a year-round body, right? Most of us, those of us who work in state legislatures, you're in, you're out in 60 days. It has to get, it's going to come up. It's going to get voted on. You may not like the answer, but you got your answer.
And that's one of the differences at the state level, right? Because it's like Congress is like, hurry up and wait. But in the state legislature, it's like, hurry up and wait. And it's going to be 2 seconds and then it's over. You're up against that clock where.
Right. And I'm sure, VJ, I'm sure, and Maria, y'all have done this too. I have written bill substitutes in the back of the room with a pencil, and you take it up to the committee clerk because you're told you go to the back of the room, fix this.
Yep.
And but now, to be fair, our friends at the state legislative level aren't dealing with like war and peace. They're not, there's a lot larger issues. And frankly, I do think it's a function of the system was designed to be that way, right? Madison, as far back as Federalist 10, said we're going to extend the sphere so that no one faction can control. So you have to get a bunch of different factions to do something. And so that's just been true since the writing of Federalist, with the design of the system. So.
And this Congress, Congress doesn't, they don't do anything until they have to.
See, Marie,
I agree. Yeah.
We're all geeking out at this point. It's like,
but I think, Maria, that's the problem, right? Like, if we're framing this as a homelessness prevention, for example, and it's like Congress, for to your point, right? It's not really in the business of preventing; it's more of like reacting to things, right? Like, and so I think the crux of all of this is trying to figure out, like, well, how do we get them to react such that it will, this will see the day of light at some point. But I firmly believe Maria has the secret sauce, the magic sauce. In some point, it'll come together.
No, and I hope so. We're going to all celebrate if it does, but VJ's my secret text weapon, though. Because he always talks me off the ledge on the Senate side in particular, because he's that Senate guy.
And I do think too, and it goes to, and again, I'm probably the latest addition to this coalition, because y'all were well established and well going, and then I was hitchhiking on the road and you picked me up, thank goodness. But no, but you all, you look at the wide coalition who's supporting it, and those, I was again just. I came in after y'all had sort of negotiated the meets and bounds where you wanted to go, but you negotiated such a good, wide-ranging, compromise, whatever, that there's nothing in it that really sets anybody on fire. So they're not, people are, oh, we've got to go. We're gonna, storm the castle, type stuff.
And so all that predates me.
Huh?
All the bumps and bruises of ironing this out predates me. Just
but that's the case a lot of times with these cleanup kinds of things, and there aren't like every third news story isn't. Remember with healthcare, there was so much health coverage about healthcare. Every third story isn't about these consumers or these housing providers and the troubles they're having with the housing choice voucher program.
Unfortunately, that's a big problem. Problem that we haven't reached critical mass about. Yep.
Our media doesn't cover this topic. It's definitely not on the news, but we are in our areas. We're doing a lot of these prevention meetings, homelessness prevention. We invite the news stations in, and we're actually going to have them do an op-ed. And I hope that they'll link this episode in with that, and then folks will share and listen, because they can get involved. Like if the phone all starts ringing in the district office about the choice bill, like they're going to start to listen and think, hey, what's going on here? And then hopefully the phones over at each of our respective organizations start ringing, and we continue to have the conversation there. And we lobbying, what you guys do, because Maria is a friend of mine, and I live vicariously through her. I wanted to be a civil. I don't know. I enjoy it. Like when she took me to a meeting at the Mortgage Bankers Association, where we met with a representative out of California, I was living my best life. Okay, we had the best time. So anytime I can tag along with Maria, but she's done such a phenomenal job of educating me. I'd be remiss if I did not give her flowers, and she's going to help me with some stuff.
Do that.
I know you do. That's why I do it. So, but she's going to help me with some more stuff on the state level too. But I know what you guys do is stressful. So when you're not in this realm, what are you guys looking forward to the most the rest of the year that is not work related? Like when you can unplug, what you going to do? Where are you going?
Can I go first?
You go first.
I think you know what my answer is going to be, Katie. Like, there's this little guy in my life. His name is John Atlas, and I love him to death. So any time I can spend time with little John Atlas Spencer, Shout out to him. I can't go like through this podcast without giving him some love. That is what I look the most forward to doing. Everybody's seen pictures of him. He's the best ever. His mom was the best ever before him. I love them all, but him and maybe watching some soccer and a good glass of wine. That's me in a nutshell.
Better get that vineyard started, Tyler.
That's right. I was like mine. I'm looking forward later this year, vacation with family. My wife and I are empty nesters now, and so it's a chance. My daughter and her husband, who's like our bonus son, and then our son and his girlfriend, so we can, it's just a chance for all of us to be able to come together, because we don't. I mean, my daughter and her husband live in Germantown, so I'm able to see them with some regularity, and son, in Baltimore, able to see him with some regularity, but not not with regularity like when they were at home, right? So that's sort of cool, and of course there will be golf and maybe a little beer involved.
Yes, I could go next. Yeah, for me, just getting out of DC. So international travel is always good. Um, and seeing family, like Tyler was saying, but when they're out of session, I try to get out of Dodge as much as possible. It's information overload. It's stressful. It's great to be able to work in that space, but it's also wonderful to get away from it.
I guess I can piggyback from Vijay, what Vijay said. Like, I love traveling. I find, I take every opportunity to be outside of DC. I will take that in a heartbeat. I was an engineer many moons ago before I actually went to law school, and so I'm a aviation geek. I just love watching planes. I also love gardening and farming. I feel like that would have been my alternative career if I didn't go to law school. And really cooking. I love to cook. I love to bake. So hopefully, if and when I see you guys in person, there'll be an opportunity where you can try some of my.
You cook stuff, Michael. We got to talk.
Well, because I like to eat.
Yeah.
I am anti-cook.
We are quite the opposite, right? I'm the green thumb here, right?
Yeah,
I'm a plant daddy. I love growing plants. And I'm really looking forward to actually traveling to the Philippines, because I'm turning 40 later this year. I get to see my grandmothers. One is turning 96, the other one's turning 100, believe it or not. So I do want to give them a shout out as well. But very, very excited to be doing all of those things when I get to the Philippines.
That's going to be awesome. I'm excited. He's been holding out on y'all with the baking and the cooking. So y'all got to make up for lost time. You've got to put in your requests. You do.
Yeah, if only I could bake my way out of Congress, right? Like I wish I could bribe lawmakers with like cookies, but I feel like that's not how it works.
Whatever works.
So I will give my wife makes incredibly great fudge. When I was doing state stuff, every now and again she'd bake me a little bit, and I would take it. We had a committee met on Friday that I worked. Take it in, and it was my delegate who chaired the committee, and so he would grab the fudge, go up there, he would pass it among his party, pass it up and down the dais, and Craddock's wife made that, and so then he would always send it back to her with a note: "Dear Tracy, thanks. Please send more fudge." But it's just.
That's awesome. We use what we have, right? Like
that's right.
It's all part of the horse trade. It's all part of the horse trade. And one final serious question before my infamous final question is: what is something that people should know about lobbying that they might not understand, like a layperson? What's something they might not know?
I can take that first. I think for me, what has really been grounding in terms of my work with our volunteers and grassroots, and I think this was already something that we've touched on earlier. I think Tyler made this point. Really, the importance of hearing from other groups and coalitions and constituents. I think as much as aides and all these offices hear from me, from Vijay, from Tyler, from Maria, and other lobbyists. Like, it is, I could not even highlight the importance of hearing from other people, from the constituents, hearing from other groups when they actually go back to their districts, when they're on recess, for example. Other thing is, the other thing that I think people should know about lobbying that people might not understand is the importance of relationship building. I think people come into DC, meet with their lawmakers once and never meet with them again. But that's not really how things work here in DC. We're in the business of building relationships, and that takes some time. That takes some, effort to maintain, to cultivate. And so this goes back to my earlier point. Like, one of the challenges is, like, when you have a staff, a place where there's high turnover with staff, it becomes challenging to build relationships, because then you have to start over again, right? And we've been in the situations where I'm talking to a housing aide and they're like, I'm brand spanking new to this office, and I didn't know that this was like a priority for my boss, and so here we go, right? And so those are the two things I wanted to uplift.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Michael on that. It definitely is a relationship building process or job. I, I I think that there's a perception out there by some that lobbyists just push bills that are not good for society and pushing their individual agendas. And I, I think that's farthest from the truth. Again, it's a relationship building job, industry, and you have to build a close, honest relationship with a member of Congress, and you're not going to go anywhere or too far if you are that sleazebag kind of car salesman that's pushing legislation that's not in the best interest of society. So I think um, if you are a good lobbyist, I think that the best way to go about it is building that relationship. And by building that relationship, it's by trust. And you build trust by being honest, giving both sides of the argument, and actually helping that member of Congress and their staff out rather than trying to push your individual agenda. I think that is something that I think most people don't understand.
So I would say that sometimes when I say people, generally I'm thinking like our own members, and what what would we want them to know that they may not know, but it's important for them to know. One is the importance of staff. I think all of us have had situations where you get set up a series of Hill meetings, you get some members, you get some staff like, well, why do I want to meet with this little 23-year-old? I said, 23, that's old for staff. But no, seriously, why don't and then you explain the importance of staff and the role, particularly on the federal level, that they play. And it is a little bit different sometimes than on the state level. In some states where the process is much more formal and staff may just be more of a clerical nature. So there's that. But then the other thing, and I really try to impress this upon our members, is that, most legislators I've met, and this is at the state and federal level, they are in this for the right reasons. There's this perception, the media, that, oh, they're all whatever. They'll take like the nth degree case, and there have been some, some folks who've done bad things. But generally, most legislators I've met, and once you've gotten to know them on a more personal level, and this is across regions, parties, just any type of way whatever, they are there for the right reasons. They're very centered and mission oriented, and and I think that's, and then understanding that, because I think once you understand that, it affects how you approach them, and hey, this is why this is in the best interest of what you're trying to do, or understanding what drives them, and the good things that drive them. Again, going to what VJ said, okay, hey, I understand you're concerned about this. This would be our perspective, but then it allows you to sort of acknowledge that. So yeah, most folks are in it for the right reasons, and the importance of staff, I think, are two things that you would love people from the outside looking in to sort of know and understand and appreciate.
I would just kind of, to keep Tyler's theme going in terms of staff, I like people to understand that, that most of these staffers on the Hill are extremely smart, and their age doesn't have anything to do with it. They work really hard, and many of them have really good backgrounds and solid backgrounds. So when you're meeting with them, you know, they are the stuff. And I also remind people that, you know, they are the staffer today, but you know, there are several members of the freshman class that used to be staffers. Several you know, former Congress people are now senators. People that came from the state legislature are now in Congress. I would say that what most people don't know is that pretty much anything you can think of, or everybody that you can think of, has some kind of representation in Congress. You know, everybody has a lobbyist on the hill, so it's not just, you know, oh, those a lot, you know, I don't like that group over there because they have lobbyists. Well, your group has one too, right? And I think the final thing I would say is that, you know, we are not. My job is not. We are not arguing with people. We are here to persuade. Our job is to build those relationships so that we can ultimately represent whoever you know, we're representing to get something, a goal accomplished. It's about persuasion. It's different than being in a court of law. It is about politics. It's about all these different things that go into, you know, getting those things done. But you know, we're in the business of representing our members, and that's what we do. It's not, we're not arguing, we're not debating. We're trying to persuade you to get to a yes. My job is to get those people to a yes, or make sure that they say no to what I need them to say no to.
Although, Maria, it sounded like you were hinting at running for office at some point.
That will not happen. You can take that on the recording.
So yeah, there is this
Except
perception.
maybe never. I don't know. Never know.
I think there is a misperception out there of lobbyists and what we do and how we operate and why we operate, because I'll invariably, especially once you get outside of DC, there's some more familiarity sometimes within DC, but outside of it, oh, well, what do you lobby for? And then, well, you need to go tell them to do this. I'm not there like just picking a whole bunch of issues to go do. I have a client, and oh, so you're like a lawyer? Well, no, I'm not an attorney. So although I like
not in a court of law, if it was only that easy.
yeah. So, but I think there is some of this perception, because I've had, like, we're neighbors. You know, I call it the cul-de-sac focus group, which is basically when you get guys my age standing in the cul-de-sac drinking a beer, debriefing. And so sometimes you get all these lobbyists and they do this and that, and I'm like, hey, me. But then I usually find out in talking to them, I'm like, oh, so are you a member of this or that? Yeah.
Yeah,
You have lobbyists too. This is exactly what Maria said. You have lobbyists too.
I have lobbyists. Yeah.
So.
Hey, this is great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all. And the final question, I'm a big music lover, and I am, 80s baby, 90s raised me. So I am all hip hop and all that. Like, even the opening to my podcast is a song by Nas called I Want to Talk to You. So if you haven't heard that, look it up. It's very political. But I love to hear everyone else's perspective. So what are each of your, if you have one, favorite song and why?
I'll go first. My favorite, I am a big Prince fan, and my favorite Prince song is Adore.
It was a heck of a concert, by the way, the Purple Rain tour in Greensboro. I saw it in Greensboro. So,
for me, go ahead. Sorry.
No.
I cut you off there, my friend.
Jump on in.
No, jump on in, man. I don't think I have a particular favorite song. It's kind of like food and wine. Depends on my mood. Sometimes I want hip hop. Sometimes I want, more alternative. But, there's always a song at the bar that always gets me up, and it's Killer's Mr. Brightside. It just puts you in a good mood. But I wouldn't say it's I wouldn't say it's my favorite song, but it always puts me in a good mood. So anyway, sorry, Tyler, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I was thinking about it too. Because I was like, okay, because I knew she was going to, you're going to ask the song question, and I couldn't, and so just out of curiosity, I opened my Spotify. Spotify have your liked songs, and I said, oh, well, there should be something that pops up there. This is how eclectic my tastes are: AC/DC, REM, Hank Jr., Metallica, Andre Crouch, Led Zeppelin, Public Enemy, Mojo Nixon, Parliament. So, but I guess if there's that one, it's the mood. Like, VJ, if I had the one song that gets me going, I have to say, as a season ticket, as a Hokie season ticket football holder, it's got to be Enter Sandman. Start jumping.
Great.
I
That
think
was what Michael said.
Jay here. I think for me, I also don't have like a particular song that I like. I tend to vary when I listen to music, but I'd say pop probably is like my go-to, right? Mr. Brightside is a favorite of mine. But I recently learned from a couple of Gen Zers I know about Chapel Roan, and so I'm starting to warm up to her. Let me just say that.
I've seen her work. Yes. And the eclectic nature, I think, of our music taste is something. Music is a great unifier too. And it speaks to being able to collaborate. You know, if you like a little bit of this, you can speak to a little bit of that. It's what makes you good. It helps make you good at what you do, right? Something for everyone. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today on this episode of The Real Spill, and appreciate the conversation, and hope that listeners will take action and contact their legislator and ask them to support the Choice and Affordable Housing Act. And with that, that's it on today's episode of The Real Spill. Until next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Katie, for having us.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you
so much.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of The Real Spill, a podcast where I spill on all things multifamily advocacy and how we as industry professionals can work together with our elected officials, stakeholders, and allies to bring about change for the rental housing industry. Thank you for joining me. I hope you've learned something new. Now, go be a voice. Until next time, Spills out.